insurgents. Creative insurgents.
Hey everybody, this is Corey Huff with The Abundant Artist.
And Melissa Dinwiddie with Living a Creative Life.
And this is the Creative Insurgents podcast,
where we are all about living a creative life according to your own rules.
Yeah. Hey everybody. So we'll have to excuse Minnie today. She is on vacation and not available for today's podcast. But today is going to be a little bit different. I'm very, very excited to share with you who our guest is today. But before we jump into that, Melissa, what's going on?
Well, as you know, Corey, I'm getting married.
Woohoo!
In like 5 days or something, and so I've been working on a ketubah for my wedding, and I wrote a song I'm keeping secret that I'll be singing as part of the ceremony, and I've been making a piece of art that will be part of the wedding ceremony that was hugely blocked around. I wasn't going to do it for months. I don't want to do it. No, that's not appropriate. And I realized I was just in resistance, and I thought to myself, what if I face creating the ketubah as a creative sandbox project, and thought of it as something that I could play with rather than something that has to be perfect or amazing or gorgeous or something, and I've been having so much fun with it. So that's what's up with me.
Totally rad.
Yeah.
So I am overcoming a fear of my own, and I am organizing my first weekend-long retreat for artists.
Woohoo!
And it's going to be in March 8th and 9th over in Astoria, Oregon, which is on the Oregon coast. It's gorgeous. It's where Goonies was filmed. And Tara Gentili has an office and a space there, and we're going to be using her space. And I'm very, very excited about it. I'm hoping that the artists that come will come away from the weekend having a really in-depth game plan and exact strategies in place for growing their business over the next 6 months to a year. So very excited about that.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Let's talk about today's guest. Now, today's a little bit different.
Exciting.
Not just because we're missing Minnie, but also we had some technical difficulties, and we had to re-record this intro. And we weren't able to get our guest back on to record the intro, but we got the rest of the episode, and it is really fantastic. We're going to talk with an artist by the name of Kelly Rae Roberts, who calls herself a Possibilitarian. And I think this is an awesome way to introduce an artist who has had $10 million in sales. She's a best-selling author. She's a very savvy businesswoman and a powerful force for good. So in a moment, when we bring her on, you're going to hear Kelly talk about how she made the transition from being a social worker to being a professional artist with over $10 million in sales. So, Kelly Rae Roberts, take it away.
Hi, thank you. That was such a generous introduction. Thank you, Corey.
Sure, you bet. Kelly, I know that most of the information about how you got started as an artist and your journey as an artist is on your site.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to get too deep into that here, but maybe you could give us a little bit of a brief overview of how you went from, where you started in your professional life to where you're at now.
Yeah, and actually, I'll share a little story I'll go back and share a really important part of that story that isn't on my website that I don't talk about very often, which was when I was 29 and I was working full-time in a hospital setting, social work. I worked mainly in the ICU with patients and families who were in crisis, a lot of death and dying, really heavy stuff. And one of the nurses on the ICU unit asked me if I would train with her to run a half marathon. And at this point in my life, I wasn't a runner, I wasn't an athlete by any stretch, and had this sort of whim to sign up and start training. And that was quite a process, and it was my first experience in my adult life of doing something that I never thought I could do. And through the process of running, my inner confidence changed, and I started to begin thinking of, wow, if I could do this, what else am I missing out on in my life? What else can I do that I didn't think that I could do? And really, that really is when I started to sort of think more broadly for my own life. And although I wouldn't start making art for another year, I go back to that running story often and think of really that was the beginning. So long story short, a year passes, I start making art. I begin to start to sell it on Etsy, and things sort of take off one thing after the next in a very short amount of time. But I think it comes back to, it started with doing something I didn't think I could do. It had nothing to do with art, but had everything to do with stepping into possibility in a way that I hadn't yet in my life.
Yeah. I love that. I love the way that you've developed your persona, and I think it's genuine to who you are, that you sort of look at where you're at in life and what's going on and say, these are the sort of things that I think I could do or that are interesting to me. How can I make it happen? Does that sort of consciously happen for you, or?
Yeah, it does, and I will say that it happens in my art life, it happens in my business life, but it really happens in my personal life, and has always really been that way for me. I think of my husband and I have been together for 14 years, and we will often, yes, thank you. We just celebrated our anniversary last weekend, and we when we look back on our time together, we think about, can you believe that we sold our house 10 years ago and put everything in storage and just went camping for a year without our jobs? Can you believe that we made this decision for you to quit your really high-paying nurse anesthesia job so you could be a stay-at-home dad? So I have this, it's just part of my personality anyway, to always be recalibrating with, am I happy? Am I not happy? What could I do more or less of in my life, to sort of create and craft a life that fits me and my family versus what maybe would be expected of us. So I think that has bled into the business side of what I do once I started making art.
Yeah, I think it's a key to happiness, right? To figure out what it is that makes you happy and actually go for it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, including myself, don't realize how these little tiny micro decisions that we're making every day really add up. For example, when you're I often will use the red couch example of when my husband and I, or when my friends and I are looking at furniture and we're deciding, do we want the standard taupe couch and the standard taupe walls, or do we want to get a little crazy and pick the red couch that's really calling us, or the yellow wall that might make us a little happier? Those little tiny, even they seem so meaningless at the time, but they're really informative of making sure we stay in the essence of who we really are.
Yeah, surrounding yourself with people and things that reinforce your choices.
It's huge.
Yeah. Switching gears just a little bit. So you're a successful artist now, and I noticed that you didn't go to art school. You went from social work to being an artist, and obviously you trained and you took a lot of classes and all of that. And one of the things that I'm noticing after interviewing a lot of independent artists, artists who don't show at major galleries, that a lot of the ones that are successful didn't go to art school. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I thought that was a really good question, and I think there's probably a lot of reasons, but I think, and I have friends who have gone to art school and who have intentionally chosen not to have commercial success, and I have friends that have gone to art school who have and have done really well. I also have friends that have gone to art school and have had their had sort of their spirits crushed a little bit through the rigorous critique process that happens. And in fact, just side note, there's an art school literally 2 blocks away from my studio. all the kids ride their bikes. I mean, I say kids, but, they're in college. So I have this idea of getting some helium balloons while they're all in class one day and tying them to the bikes with little notes on them that say, "Your art is beautiful. It's amazing." Just because there's there's a lot of truth to that story that we hear of going to art school, and just it's tough, the critiquing process. So
you know what? If you did that, I would totally do it with you. Because I know the art school that you're talking about, and I have friends that go there, and I know exactly what you're talking about. So
okay, well,
yeah.
It's a kindness mission. Let's do it together, because this idea has been in my head for almost 2 years. I pass by that school every day, and I keep thinking I'm going to do it. School's in session. I think it just started, so let's do it.
That'd be so awesome. You have to take pictures and write about it if you do.
I will.
Totally.
I recently just started a kindness mission series on my blog.
I was just going to bring this up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I haven't been as diligent in doing them myself, but this is what I really want to do.
Yeah, Kelly, I had a question. So I started making art about the same age that you were when you started. I was 28, 29, and I'm really curious. Did you consider yourself artistic before that? What got you into it? What led you to decide, I'm going to start making art? Did you go take a class? Did you start playing around with things at home? What's the story there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I did not consider myself an artist or creative by any stretch. I grew up in a house with an older sister who was sort of the creative one. She was a poet. She was a singer. She was an artist. She was a writer. She was, and I just, for whatever reason, it just never occurred to me growing up in a house with another creative person that there was room enough for more than one creative artist in the family. And she was 6 years older than me, so somewhere along the line I just got into my head that there wasn't room for another artist and that I would sort of take the academic route, and so I went to this really rigorous academic public high school and then college, and was sort of on this overachiever track.
That sounds so much like you, Melissa.
However, all of my friends were, even though I was sort of kind of more on the academic path, all of my friends were in college and in high school were theater students, writers, artists, and I always wanted to be in that group, but I never was, and I never considered myself part of it. So it's interesting looking back, and it's a question that I often will, when I'm talking to people, will ask them, who are the people you admire? What do you, even when you're looking at a piece of art, what do you admire about that piece of art? Because it's such a clue and such a cue for what's drawing us.
Yeah.
I just didn't, hindsight is 20/20, but.
Yeah. You really started. Go ahead, Melissa.
How did you get started? What made you decide, I'm going to try this?
Yeah, so I was working at my social work job. I just was doing the writing thing. There was a scrapbook store that was hanging that lived. There's a scrapbook store that lived down the road from where I lived, and I was going to the scrapbook store to make Christmas presents in the December of 2005. And I was, this scrapbook store had not just supplies and stuff, but they had more mixed media kind of stuff, and they had examples of these cards that people were making that involved not just paper and glue, but also paint. And around the same time, someone sent me a link to Sabrina Wharton Harrison's website. So the combination of that, making Christmas cards and kind of dabbling with paint, and then someone sending me a link to Sabrina Wharton Harrison's website, it was just like this whole world opened up, and I just started calling in sick to my day job, quite honestly. And my whole dining room turned into like a big experiment, and I bought several books by Claudine Helmuth on how to use gel medium, and it was just experimentation and play. But I was totally and completely hooked, in love. It was my hot boyfriend, and it still is my hot boyfriend. But we've had our ups and downs at the moment, since. But it was like falling in love. Yeah.
That is great, and I love hearing that. It doesn't really matter when you start. It matters, how much heart you put into it. So
yeah.
I so resonate with that hot boyfriend feeling, because that's exactly how I felt when I got started. And I'm really curious from your experience. You said that there's been ups and downs. How I know that for a lot of people, for myself and for a lot of people that I work with, who have developed professional careers around their creativity, it is very easy to allow that spark that got us into it in the first place to kind of get sucked dry. And I'm wondering, like, what do you do for yourself? What have you done for yourself to make sure that doesn't happen, that you're continually staying in what I call the creative sandbox and experimenting and playing and really feeding that creative need?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it also goes back to the question that Corey asked about art school, and but I think I have found, I've certainly, when I say we were hot and heavy, like any love affair, it was hot and heavy, and I was maybe like too overboard, and then I would have burnout, and then retreat, and then come back to it and sort of get reacquainted and burn out again, and I've since, it's enough time has passed now that I've learned that balance is a myth, that there's ebbs and flows of when I feel really creatively inspired and when I don't. And what I've learned is that when I'm not feeling incredibly creatively inspired as far as on the canvas, I just take that creative energy and innovation and invention and put it toward my marketing or business side of it, because I find that the business piece of it is actually quite creative, and I love that part too. So kind of keeping a balance of both of those worlds going, and not giving either one of them too much of my energy at any one time seems to help a little bit. But again, that changes from month to month as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. I think it's brilliant, and I think it's something that a lot of people that I work with just don't have that awareness about the ebbs and flows being normal.
Yeah.
And it's certainly what I've done in my own life. When I got burned out on visual art, I started making music, and then came back to the visual art later in a different form, and, back and forth, and giving yourself the permission to do that, I think is really important, as well as I have always been a big proponent of this, looking at business and marketing as a creative act, not as this horrible, awful, painful burden that we have to do, but something that we can have fun with, the way that we have fun with our art.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm totally with you. I think of it the same thing. It's almost, it feels like a little bit like a creative game to me, the business side of what I do. And I wish they would teach this in art school, not just like how to be an entrepreneur, but how to creatively market the art that you're so, if that is even an interest for people who are on that track.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think I think innovation is a muscle that we grow, and there's a lot of creative play around invention and innovation, and I think it's, I find it really creatively enlightening. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Kelly, I've noticed that over the course of the years on your blog, like, you've done a lot. That blog has been sort of a sandbox for your innovation and evolution as an artist.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, it's sort of like a petri dish. Does this work? No. It is. I mean, the blog has chronicled before I was even making art, and the tail end of running that half marathon all the way to now. And there have been so many trials and errors, and just putting it out there and see if it'll work. But I've made lots of mistakes, and lots of things have worked, and lots of things have not.
So would you share a story of something that really didn't work?
Yeah, so I guess it was 2009. I was trying to, I was sort of like trying on what it would feel like to be a business owner that had sponsors on my blog, and didn't really have a vision for what that would look like. So I just tried out having little sponsorship blurbs at the end of posts, and I would have them like 3 times a week or something like that, and it got really annoying for people, and something about that just didn't sit well with me either. But I did that for probably 3 months before I realized that probably wasn't a good idea for me. So I think integrating money into my blog has probably been my biggest challenge, and I took a break from it for a couple of years and then came back to it and tried it a different way. And I think I'm settled on a few times a year I do a big sponsored giveaway post and make a big party and make a big deal out of it. And that feels good to me, but for a long time that's been probably my biggest struggle. And also having blog content and starting series and then stopping them or starting series again, and it's sharing the process of coming into the creative journey can be a really vulnerable one too, and there's a lot of, like, the more visible I've become, the more judgment I've received, and really getting really clear about having comments. For a long time I didn't have comments at all, and then I had them, and just the evolution of a blog.
Yeah. One of the things I love about your work and your blog is the way that you've been very open about talking about all of this and about writing about it and all of that. I talk to a lot of artists who recognize the value of blogging, but they say, I have no idea what to say. I'm not a writer.
Yeah.
Any advice for them?
I think for me, I found that tuning out in the early days, I don't do this consciously anymore, but when I was just starting to put my art out into the world, I turned my comments off because I just wanted to make sure that I was writing from a place of creative process for me, and I didn't want to feel like I was writing for an audience. And so for me, turning my comments off helped me. Of course, there's a little backlash about you're not cultivating community in that way, but that wasn't my objective at the time. It was really a creative process for me. So I think maybe my advice would be to get really clear on what is your blog in service of? Is it in service of cultivating community? Then we can come up with some ideas around how to do that. Is it in service of just creative process and writing practice? Then tailor it around that. But I think until you're really clear on, are you writing for an audience? Are you not writing? There's no wrong answer, but just getting clear on who are you writing for, and really choosing those people and choosing that audience and getting into their mind of what do they want to see. For me, my audience really wants to see the process behind the art. They love seeing the paintings in process. They love home tours. They love just sort of getting a glimpse of lifting the veil and behind the scenes. And also are wanting to have community with each other. So that's where we do the Possibilitarian project. The kindness missions are a new thing, and just sort of some ways to bring my people together. I'm really interested in that now, whereas 3 years ago that wasn't my objective. So I think giving ourselves permission to check in and change it up and do what is calling us in that moment. Nothing's permanent, and everything's temporary. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the positive message, the kindness missions. I'm so very excited about doing some of those.
I'm excited about doing that with you.
I love the fact that you are aware of critics and that you have sort of created a place in your life for a way of having positive people in your life so that you can keep the critics in perspective. I know in other interviews that I've read and listened to with you, you described that process as sort of an editing out process.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it sounds so harsh, editing out. But there was a moment, especially, not so much anymore, but in the very beginning of my creative journey when I was making this transition, I just had people in my life who didn't understand what it was that I was trying to do, or they themselves were not, they just weren't around it, and maybe perhaps brought up stuff for them. They thought I was crazy. What am I doing? So over time, I feel like I've had to let some people go, not in a like I'm breaking up with you kind of way, but just kind of in a like I'm not putting my energy into this relationship as much as I am focusing on cultivating new friendships and community where people really do understand, because they're doing it themselves, what it is I'm trying to do. So that's what I mean when I talk about that, but not so much more. I feel like I spent a lot of time cultivating community, and that has been huge, just to have people who are ahead of me in some respects and people who are sort of behind me, but we're all on a really similar path in orbit. That's I would say the number one thing that has helped propel me and keep me clear. Yeah,
it makes such a difference to know that you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're walking alongside other people.
Yeah, and it also makes such a difference to sit across the table from someone and they say, I just got the most, I was really looking forward to getting this fabric launch and it's not happening, and to know what that possibly means, how much work they put into it, what it could have meant, just various situations, and dealing with people are always surprised when I tell them that I get my fair share of negative comments, but it's not people being mean. They're just it's more judgment. For example, I have to tell you this example because this just happened last week, where I posted a picture of my son and I on Instagram painting, and he had he's 3, he's not even 3, he had on a smock, and then the next day I posted another picture of us painting together, and on this particular day he had on clothes but he didn't have on a smock. And then maybe 2 days later, a similar picture, but this time he was like in his diaper and there was paint everywhere. So to me, whatever, like he can paint in whatever he wants to paint in. But someone left a comment that they were relieved to see that I wasn't constricting my son and making him wear a smock. So it's that kind of stuff. I get a lot of judgmental comments about my lifestyle and what I've chosen to put my kid in, and that kind of stuff. It's really, I don't want to say frustrating because I don't give it that much time, but it's just interesting what people hone in on.
Mm-hmm. And it says a lot more about the person making the comment than it does about you.
Yeah, and in those instances, I always go back to what my friend Brene Brown talks about in Daring Greatly, which is her most well-loved read book, which is, are they also a mom? Do they also have a 2-year-old? Are they also, are they in this similar arena with me? Are they also putting their vulnerability as far as like putting their creative work out into the world in service? Are they in that same arena? If they are, maybe I'll consider what they have to say. If they're not, forget about it. Yeah. It's a brilliant way to really look at critiques and criticism that inevitably come your way when you're putting yourself out there in the world. Yeah.
The other day, and I don't know if you might have any suggestions, but the other day I was talking to an artist who, she's actually pretty talented, and it took 2 sessions together before she actually showed me her real art. She showed me her like portraits and her sort of safe art, that like cards and things like that she had made. Yeah. And then our second session together, she showed me, she's like it's like buried on page 3 of her gallery on her website, and she's like, I really like doing this. And it was so funny because I was like, oh my gosh, this is really good.
Because you could tell that she really loved it because it was exceptional.
Yeah, it was completely different from everything else that she had done. It was full of color, and you could tell it was just full of soul. And I said, why don't you do more stuff like this? And she told me this big story about how she was afraid to do stuff like that, that she didn't think anybody would like it, and basically what it came down to is she didn't have anybody around her reflecting back her value to her and reflecting back, her true worth.
Yeah.
And so we started talking about how can you find more people in your community to help you to be around that. Do you have any advice for artists like that? Because I know there's a lot of them in that position.
Yeah, as far as getting over the fear of putting their art that they especially love out into the world. Yeah,
doing that, and then maybe finding, how do you create a community around yourself so that you don't sit alone thinking nobody likes my stuff. Like, how do you create a community of people who want to strive with you?
Yeah, I think that's easier now more than ever, now that we have the internet. And I talk about this often with my husband about how the life that we're living now would not be possible 10 years ago, and that the community piece wouldn't even be as accessible either. But I know for me, creating community came down to joining Illustration Fridays was a really big one for me, of putting my art out on my blog through this Illustration Friday thing, and really getting feedback, not negative feedback, but just keep going. And this was in the very early days of creating really bad art, but just having the encouragement of this community and these these themes or these challenges every week. To keep posting something every week, and having this really specific community of people rallying you on, and you are also looking at their art and rallying them on. I think that's one way to start. I'm also a really big fan. I also have this dream, Corey, of somewhere on my website having a map of the whole world, and letting people declare themselves Possibilitarians, and then pinning the map where they're at with a picture that says I'm a whoever, so that you can find your fellow Possibilitarians in your neighborhood or what have you. But I'm a big fan of also sending an email to someone that you admire and think highly of and want to have a tea date. A lot of my local friends started that way. Me. Do you know Lainey Taylor? She's an author. She writes books, but she writes young adult fiction, sci-fi books here in Portland. She did that to me, and I thought she just sent me an email let's have tea, and so I just have started adopting that process. I also, several years ago, I invited a bunch of ladies, just got really, really ballsy, and invited a bunch of ladies to the Oregon coast from all over the country, and they all said yes, and we went to the Oregon coast, and we've been a collective community ever since. That was 6 years ago.
Wow.
I think there's lots of different ways. I think now through Facebook and Twitter and blogging and comments and
that's
a lot of ways.
There are, and that's so a few weeks ago I sent out an email to the people who read the Abundant Artist blog, and it was literally just this thing's I've been thinking about this. It didn't go on my blog. It was just hey readers, what do you think about this? And it was around the idea of how do we create the idea of being an abundant artist or a possibilitarian? How do you create that life of abundance for more artists? And what could you do to contribute to that and grow that idea among the artists of the world? And I got dozens and dozens of emails back. I was totally overwhelmed.
What were the suggestions?
And nearly every single artist said something to the effect of, I need to find a way to connect with other artists. Yeah.
It is the single biggest gift in my life, not just personally, but professionally too. Having it doesn't have to be a giant community, but having a few people. It doesn't take many. there's just a few people who get it, just get it, and that you can check in with. How are you doing? How's this project going? What are your, even just, have you ever heard of this? What do you think about this? This is really scary. I'm really excited. It's just huge.
Yeah, and it's hard if you're stuck in your studio all day.
Yeah. I know. I was, yes. I recently just moved into a new studio there's 4 of us. And that's been hugely different from working alone all day long, having people across the way.
And do you feel like it's different in a positive way?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
In what way?
Well, it's not as lonely. I mean, you're going to work, and my studio mate Pixie just walked in, and there she is, and she's beautiful, and I can say it's like having coworkers. I really miss having coworkers and talking about, how are you doing? How are your kids? What are you doing this weekend? Do you think you can dance last night on television? Being planted in the real world. I really missed, and was starting to go a little crazy. So it's been good, and I find that I gather energy when other people are in the room. Just, I can focus more clearly, and I get more in the mood to make art when there's other people around. So.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's something really powerful. I've always felt something really powerful about creating individually in community. So when everybody in the room is working on their own thing, and nobody's bothering anybody else because we're all focused on our own thing, there's something that I have felt myself, my creativity level just goes from here to here, because you're fed by all this creative activity around you, even though you're not actually interacting with them. Just the presence in the room, it creates this buzz, you know?
I know. I'm totally with you. I'm the same way. It's like my favorite thing to do in the world is to work on my own project while there's other people in the room working on their own projects. Part of how I came into the creative journey was going to creative retreats, and so you'd be in a big room making your project with 20 other people, and so I think I still have that. I also think that there's something about that really speaks to the extroverted, for me, it speaks to the extroverted part of myself that really feeds off other energy in the room, but it really, nurtures that I'm really an introvert at heart, that introverted piece of myself that just wants to, like, do my own thing. So it's sort of, you get the best of both worlds in that way. Yeah.
Yes, this is why I host retreats, because I love that feeling so much. I'm curious, how did you find your current studio situation? How did you create that?
Yeah, so I had a baby and I'd always worked from home, and then after I became a mom, I continued to work from home, and then as my baby was getting older and older, it was getting increasingly hard to get anything done. I had a hard time, like, being able to focus and actually close the door and work. And so when he was about 18 months old, I just got on Craigslist in Portland and started doing my search, and found a space down in the Pearl District in Portland, and moved in and did that for a year, and then realized getting out of my house was a really important move, but still working alone was not suiting me. And then my lease was coming up, and one of my local artist friends, Flora Bowley, and we started to dream about this idea of having a shared studio space. We would call it Soul Shine Studio, and we would have workshops, and we'd have gatherings with women and tea, and we had all these couch conversations and filming. We had all these ideas, and so a space came open in the very building that I was in that was upstairs and had a little bit more light and was bigger, and we signed a lease. And then in the process of doing that, we invited 2 other local artists to join the space with us. So now there's 4 of us, and we moved in May. So it's still kind of new. Yeah.
So, and I'm curious, I know when I've hosted retreats, I designate silent times where people don't have to worry about being talked to by other people. And I had some pushback from people before the retreat, being concerned about this silent time, but then everybody who was concerned, it ended up being their favorite part of the retreat, because everybody's creating, and you don't have to worry about having to converse with anybody. So do you have any guidelines or things set up there? How does that work?
No, we don't have any structure at all. And I wish you could see it, but like here I am, and right there is a desk where Pixie sits, and right there behind, like right here, is a desk where one of our other studio mates, Link, sits. So we're sitting in really close proximity, but so far we haven't had to. It's not very often that we're all here at the same time. We all have different schedules, and sometimes we're here at the same time. But no, we haven't had that. We haven't had that come up yet. But I like that idea of, sometimes Pixie will put her. She might even have them in now. Her earplugs. Because she does a ton of writing, and so she'll just put her earphones in and, focus while I'm, online or making art or whatever it is that I'm doing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Kelly, this has been really fun. We're getting close to time, so before we run out of time, I try to end most of the interviews that I do with this question: is you've done a number of interviews, you've talked to people.
Yeah.
What is something that no interview has asked you that you wish people would ask you more about, or that you had a chance to talk about more?
I don't know. I will say that what doesn't come up very often is how balancing motherhood and business, which is a topic really that I feel really strongly about and passionate about. In fact, I was just interviewing another mom before we got on together about how she does it. I'm really curious about that, and I'm often surprised that doesn't come up very much. Or what else doesn't come up? Like money. No one ever asks about money.
In what sense? Like, nobody asks you how much money you make, or something else?
Well, not even that, but just I think that would be maybe a little strange. but just the see, maybe this is why people don't ask it, because even I myself can't come up with a good question for it.
Well, actually, I'm curious, because I've interviewed a number of artists and creatives specifically about how they have, how they've developed it to a place where they're making a living from their creative thing. And one thing I've always found really interesting is just where the money comes from. And for most people that I've interviewed, it comes from a number of different streams. It's a patchwork. So is that something that you'd be willing to share, where the different income streams are?
So, and I run a program called Hello Soul, Hello Business, it's a collaborative project with an entrepreneur artist that lives in the UK. And we, and in that program, which we're getting ready to relaunch it here in the next few weeks. But we talk a lot about this. We talk a lot about defining your soul mission for your business. Why are you in business? We talk about choosing your who before you choose what you're going to give them. And a lot of businesses will come up with a product or service, and then they'll go and market it to who they think that would be good for. And we're all about picking your people first, and then choosing products and services that could serve them. But anyway, I'm getting off track. Back to streams of income. So I would say 50% of my income comes from digital products that I offer online. So e-courses and e-books. And then selling my art prints, and then I get a commission fees, affiliate fees through Amazon and Dick Blick and through retailers, and then the other half is royalties. So royalties on the products that get sold worldwide. Yeah, so it's pretty 50-50. but it's a lot. I mean, there's sponsorships that come in. There's, you know, I probably have a good solid 7 different streams of income coming in. And that, by the way, was one of the best pieces of advice that someone gave me early on, was to really diversify your income as much as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. And I got really obsessed with the idea of creating passive income for myself, mm-hmm. And just really focused on how can I create as much income streams that are passive for me. And most of them at this point, most of them are.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, Kelly. This is
Thank you.
This has been so much fun. I wish that we could go for hours, but you know we all.
Yeah, definitely.
But we really appreciate you taking the time. We'll definitely put some links up to your site and some of the resources you mentioned in this interview. Any last words?
I don't think so. Just thanks for chatting. It was really fun.
Creative insurgents. Creative insurgents.